Very pleasant good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Magandang umaga po, magandang tanghali, magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. As we speak now, I'd like to welcome you first to your hour, and this is Rita Gadi. As I said, simultaneous with our program now, if you're watching it live, wherever you're located throughout the country, and if you're abroad, what is happening in the Batasang Pambansa, we have the joint houses of the lower chamber, which is Congress, and the Senate that are conducting the national canvassing of the votes for the president and the vice president. You call this the National Board of Canvassers, according to our constitution. And they are reading the canvass votes coming from the different regions and also from the provinces in the regions themselves. About how long ago has it been? Yes, 36 years ago was my last coverage of the National Board of Canvassers at the Batasang Pambansa, and this was the election for the president and vice president with President Ferdinand E. Marcos and Mrs. Corazon Aquino. And the canvass of votes were being read likewise. It was covered live the way it is being covered today, likewise from the Batasang Pambansa, or from Congress as we would call it. You will notice that as they read the provinces, they also have a graph, a chart where they have the names of the candidates for the presidency and the vice presidency. And beside their names, they are filling up the number of votes. This is per province. We have 81 provinces, 15 regions, but the provinces have already consolidated the towns and cities. So it is not being read anymore. They're just reading the provinces themselves. And this is being undertaken live, as I've said, at the Batasang Pambansa. The title of our program this afternoon, "The Son is the Father of the Man." It is actually a quote from the poem of William Wordsworth. I just changed the son because in the original poem, it is the child is the father of the man. But for purposes of what we are going to talk about this afternoon, this is the son, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., as the father of the man. There are many interpretations of this particular line, which comes from that poem of William Wordsworth, the title, "My Heart Leaps." I won't read the entire poem, just this line, which is very critical as far as our trying to understand the phenomenon that we have witnessed over the past several months, and of course, until it culminated in the 32 million votes, they say, for the candidacy of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., BBM, as he is fondly called, and for Inday Sara, mayor of Davao City. This is just about the second time that we have a majority of this magnitude. The last time was also for the President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. in 1986. And during the canvassing of votes, you had, one of the assemblymen of the opposition who stood beside the speaker, who was actually part of the reading of the canvass of votes, and he was objecting to some of the returns from these canvass votes. So they had to place an asterisk. But I must have repeated this so many times in several past episodes that actually when they had the tabulation after the canvass votes were all read and printed on the boards, and they added this all up and removed the votes, the canvass votes with the asterisk away from the total addition, President Marcos won by 1 million votes, a little over 1 million votes. And so that would be part of the canvas of votes for the proclamation of the elected president and the vice president. And so that was how we can see that it is very important that this is being seen and heard by the people themselves. And that is why if you open your television right now, you would see that they're opening the ballot boxes where you have the canvas votes, and they will be reading this aloud, and that will be tabulated accordingly. But this time you have several candidates for those offices of president and vice president. 36 years ago, we only had 2 contenders, but now you have several of them. That is why it takes quite a while for the reading. And also since the names are written in alphabetical order. So I've been receiving calls asking, where are the votes of BBM and so forth? Yes, they're coming in alphabetical order. So maybe Abelia comes first, letter A, etc., all the way up to the end. And then you could see there how this is also being printed in a giant screen. So this could be seen and read by the rest of the country, nationwide, as a matter of fact. But let us go to this phenomenon. When we speak of the son as the father of the man, we speak of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who has stood not just as a symbol, nor an image, nor a remembrance of his father. He stands by himself with his own personality and his character. And that is exactly what over 31 million voters wrote in their ballot. What is it in Ferdinand Marcos Jr. that brought about this rising multitude of support coming from the different age brackets? We have already mentioned the demographics for this, those from 18 years of age until about 24, then from 25 until about 44, from those ages of 45 until about 50 to 60, and then you have the senior citizens, voters, all the way until, well, some of them are even reaching 90. The mother of our president-elect actually is 93, and she voted, she will be 93 next month, and she voted in the home province of the Marcoses in Loag. So there you have the analysis of the demographics of the age brackets that voted for Ferdinand Marcos Jr. And a lot of people have been actually part of this, not just joining the caravans or joining the rallies, but actually supportive all throughout the campaign period and even before. When I say even before, this means that this goes all the way back to 1986, where the name Marcos and the chanting of Marcos, Marcos pa rin has continued over the decades. There is not much media coverage regarding this because there is no access that the Marcos sympathizers and supporters and the Marcos loyalists have as far as mainstream media is concerned. And of course, we know that in the broadcast industry, it is very difficult to get into the publications that are held by mostly oppositionists against the Marcoses, the television networks also being held by oppositionists to the Marcoses. You can imagine that over the years, 36 years, as a matter of fact, there has been some silence as far as the Marcos loyalists and Marcos supporters are concerned. But technology has advanced to the effect that we have social networking, the internet, access to the wide world web, and there you have all of these different avenues, or what you would call the different instruments that could be utilized. Plus, of course, your mobile phone, where you could access to all of this, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and several others which may be developing if they have not yet really come out on surface. But that is why it has always been recently that because of social networking, then there is the audio and the visual access to Ferdinand Marcos Jr. And he began by simple blogs where you have him with his sons, three sons, as a matter of fact, on the day-to-day affairs of a family life where they joke about each other, where they discuss, well, things that normally fathers and sons would discuss or talk about. And then there is the wife, our future first lady, also coming in, also with the children, with the three sons, and several other episodes that we watch over this blogs, which is not very lengthy and not very complicated, but it is full of the day-to-day affairs of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and how he conducts himself as far as his family is concerned. And every once in a while, you would also hear him talking about certain aspects in civil life, in public life, certain issues which may be raised, some protocols as far as the pandemic, the health protocols as far as the pandemic is concerned. In fact, when he was contaminated with COVID-19, shortly after arriving from Spain, and I think that was where he caught this, somewhere in Europe, we also had the opportunity to watch him confined, quarantined, and still trying his best to share with those who are interested to listen to how painful, how difficult, how serious it is to be contaminated by COVID-19. And that is where you could see that the importance of sharing this has brought about more of the intimacy that BBM it developed as far as Marcos loyalists and everybody else were curious to find out what has happened to him in this period of silence. You will recall that since 1986, he was already in exile together with the members of his family, and not much was heard or read about him. He had no access also to interviews. And so there was a period of silence until he returned home here to the Philippines, one after the other, with his two sisters eventually coming in, and the last of them, Mrs. Marcos. The late president died in Honolulu, and it took quite a while, several years, as a matter of fact, before his body was allowed to be returned to the Philippines. The silence that we experienced as far as BBM was concerned, and the silence too that he experienced, is something that we have to consider insofar as the great multitude that are supportive of him today. It is not just, as they would say, parang ningas kugon. No, they have followed the Marcos family, Marcos loyalists, and all those who have been devoted to President Marcos. They followed the Marcos family. But I'd like to zero in on BBM specifically, as he would be our next president of the Republic. He is the son, the father of the man. And this speaks quite lengthily as far as what he has gone through, not just a period of silence. Because now the questions are, the opposition keeps on asking, are we forgetting the Marcos era where they're condemning Marcos with so many invectives and so many accusations? But can you ask, are you forgetting likewise what BBM went through over the past 36 years? Not just the period of being away from his country, but watching his father, watching his mother, and having lived with them and having known what they have done as massive, great contributions to the development of our country for 20 years as president and first lady, and then to be flown to the airbase in Hicam. Can you imagine how it must have been for him to feel that there seems to be nothing that can be done at that stage. You had the thumbs of America actually pressed on them. So when people ask, why is there another Marcos coming up? We should not forget what has happened during the Marcos regime. Well, I ask, the Marcoses also have not forgotten what 36 years of vilification and accusations have been thrown at them and what they have gone through. Now that you have the son, who is now the father of the man, coming to fore as the next president of our republic, let us look into that kind of life that he went through and how he has carried the pain, the sufferance in silence. You have not heard one line, one word ever that he has answered any of this with any amount of anger. And it is not to say that he was not defending himself, because there is nothing to defend. The accusations that his father stole the money of the Filipino people, he knows that. He knows his father. He knows the history of his father's lineage. He knows the scholastic record of his father, an outstanding student, a bar top notcher with averages from 98 to 100. He knows the exceptional case that his father defended by himself, against himself, a murder charge, as a matter of fact, when he was not even a graduate of the College of Law. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. knew all this. He carries this in memory. He carries this in his heart. So try to imagine what this man must have felt, how he went through all of these false accusations. To this day, they throw it at him. Ibalik ang ninakaw. Ang ninakaw ng kanyang ama, that is the family that he stood with and has stood by. And today, it is not just a matter of having to clear his name, because I've discussed this quite a number of times. The severest court of justice, which is the United States of America, in tandem with the Philippine government of the opposition government of Mrs. Aquino, filing one of the most difficult cases in the history of criminal law and accusing the father of BBM of running a syndicate, which is a corrupt organization. Has anybody asked, ano kaya ang nasa isip niya nung dumadaan sila sa paghihirap na ganon? When he was inside the courtroom, somewhere at the back of the courthouse, where he sat quietly and listened to the witnesses, the accusations, and the prosecution, pointing a finger at his mother and saying, this is the wife of the man who stole from the Filipino people. Ano kaya ang naramdaman ni BBM na ganun ang nakita niya na ginagawa sa kanyang ina? A mother whose role as a first lady, although there is no office for it, has been expanded to give what? The Filipino people a heart center, a tertiary hospital for the kidneys, for kidney transplants, for dialysis, and all of those related illnesses for kidneys, a lung center. So the tuberculosis was practically erased during that time, precisely because of all the different apparata, equipment, state of the art, as a matter of fact. She personally went all over the world to choose all of this equipment in this tertiary hospitals. A hospital for children. That is the mother he watched in the courthouse, where the finger of the United States of America prosecution was pointing at her. Meron bang nakaisip man lang na tanungin kung gaano kasakit ang kanyang dinaanan? Ngunit wala kang nadinig na isang salita na siya ay sumagot sa mga nagbabatiko sa kanila. Whatever sufferance he carried, that is part of the character of the man. And so when you ask, ano, 32 million voted for him, perhaps of the 57 million voters that were registered as having voted, already more than 80% have come out to write his name. 36 after he was last seen in Malacanang with his father, his mother, and his family. Wala pa siyang asawa noon. Binata pa. Kaya kung titingnan natin lahat itong mga nagbabatiko sa kanya at magtataka yung mga opposition, saan nanggaling yan? We will not allow another Marcos. Why? Why will you not allow another Marcos to be the president of the republic? This BBM, the son who is now the father of the man, has gone through the sufferance that can be carried only by a man strong enough in character, who did not fight back verbally or physically against his detractors. Napakalupit ng kanilang ginawa sa kanila. Sa kanyang ina na lang, pag-uwi sa Pilipinas, kulang-kulang 1,000 kaso ang final. Doon, habang sila ay nasa ibang bansa, ang pinaka, the most powerful country in the world. Can you imagine that? An ally, supposedly, of our country and their Department of Justice working together with the administration of those who were opposing the Marcoses. And over the years, every time the Marcos name would come out, then you would have all of these oppositionists coming out again with all of their accusations. Walang katapusan sapagkat hindi sila nagsasawa magbatikos. At bakit? You know, they say that there is this deep element of guilt that creates a vacuum within the souls of these people. And nature abhors a vacuum. It is tragic that they have sustained such anger and such hatred for so long. And they come up with all those issues against BBM. But if you look at the quality of life that he has led, truly, he is a good man. May bait, as we say in our language. May taglay na bait. It is difficult to find that character in just about any individual that has gone through what he has gone through. There are provisions in our Constitution which give the qualifications for the office of the president. Ang dami-daming nagtatanong, hindi man niya nakatapos ng college. It is not in the law for him to finish college, but he has gone through the studies of the best schools that you can find in Britain. These are outstanding universities and colleges. And if he may not have completed the degree to which he was enrolled in, he had the certificate that he attended the subjects and completed them as required. And so they would size up and say, ay, kulang-kulang ang kanyang pinag-aralan, nagbubulaan siya kasi hindi naman siya graduate. He never said so. In fact, when he went back there to just get that certificate that he was indeed enrolled and completed studies in certain subjects, you should have seen his smile. He was smiling at all of us. And most specifically, perhaps he was smiling at those who were attacking him and saying na, hindi ka naman graduate dyan sa Oxford, kung saan yung mga eskwelahan na yan, sa School of Economics, sa Wharton, and all of this. Oh my goodness. Is it not enough that you have accused his family, his father, his parents, of so many crimes that were never proven to be crimes, except in the mouth of those who spew this out. I've spoken of this lengthily in so many other episodes when I spoke about the trial in New York City and how his mother was acquitted, and likewise in tandem with his father, because that would have been a syndicated crime as envisioned in the law, the American law, that they were supposed to have violated. And over the years when he came back, he entered public service, governor, congressman, senator. He did not come out in media and say, look, I'm back. This is what I've done. And this is what I've accomplished. And this is what a Marcos is. He need not say that. Because the generation before him, the generation in the 20 years of his father, and the generation in the 36 years after his father, they know what a Marcos is. And they look at him and they see not just what they remember of the past, but they see now the continuation of what they have held in their hearts for the longest time in Philippine contemporary history. From 1965 to today, that's 56 years. Kaya pag nagtatanong, ang dami namang bumoto, 36 million, at bakit hindi? If the people are able to carry their loyalty to the Marcos name and now to the son for 56 years, who is there to dare question this? Who has the temerity even to ask the question, another Marcos as president, at bakit nga hindi? They say it is in God's own time. That is written even in the Catholic Bible, in Ecclesiastes, that there is a time and a season for everything. When he entered public office for the first time, did BBM file his certificate of candidacy for the office of the presidency immediately? He bided time. He wanted to feel how it was in Ilocos, the land of his father, his land. And he lived there when he was governor. His sons studied there in their elementary years. His wife taught law at the university there. Because that is where his roots are. Not just his father, but himself too. And when we speak of roots, that is why we say now, the son is the father of the man. He carries not just the bloodline of a Marcos, he carries also what they have accomplished within himself. Not that we say that he will continue to do as they do, but he will continue to be as a Marcos would do. And so, I tried to list down all the different invectives and accusations that they have thrown at him to this day. There is still the pending petitions in the Supreme Court, all the disqualification cases, etc. And sometimes we wonder how selfish it must be for human beings to continue this anger, this hatred, thinking only that they are the only ones qualified to be the leaders of our country. But then again, let us be able to accept at this stage and believe that there is a divine law greater and more powerful than the law of man. And that is why, as I've always emphasized, there is a time for when the time is right. Ferdinand Marcos Jr., now whose votes are being canvassed together with his vice president, Inday Sara, as she's fondly called, mayor of Davao City. Can you imagine the son and the daughter of two presidents now in tandem and would eventually be the president-elect of our republic? Can this not mark now in our national psyche, our national consciousness, some kind of a, not just a phenomena, but some kind of a platform on which the son now stands, the daughter now stands, not just to continue what their parents have done, but to be able to sign their names in the history of our country and the different aspects of concern that they will be dealing with. Just a couple of days ago, was it yesterday, you had BBM first time talking to the media and giving snippets of how over the past weeks, ambassadors, well, first of course, heads of state of different countries have called him and have sent their letters of congratulation to him. But here, as he spoke, he mentioned ambassadors from several countries, from Japan, from India, and several others. And he detailed what they have discussed, what they have talked about. And already there you could see and you could hear that there is this quality of leadership that over the period of the campaigns was not perhaps elaborated in media because they hardly ever covered many of his, his interviews and several other media exposure. But then again, in this press conference that he held recently, that culminates in many ways what is already to be expected for the next administration under both Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and Inday Sara Duterte. And so it goes that we have something like what? 80%, as I've said, of our archipelago, 75% of the 81 provinces, 15 of the 17 regions, and then of course in Metro Manila, which was traditionally opposition, you have 15 of the national capital region cities. 10 out of the 15 cities in the region overwhelmingly voting for Ferdinand Marcos Jr. And then you have also the largest provinces, 16 out of 21 of these largest provinces also voting for him. Well, if you're listening to the live coverage in the Batasang Pambansa, in the parliament, then you would also hear now the canvassed returns coming from the provinces of the different regions of our country. But here we are facing the face, the image, the personality, the character of this new president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. And he symbolizes the people more than symbolizing himself or his heritage. Because over the years, over the past 56 years, that was the name that was over the horizon, that has indelibly marked its signature in the history of our republic. I cannot add any more to all the accomplishments that I have lengthily mentioned in so many other episodes. We've been at this Rita Gadi hour for what? For over 3 years now. And every episode that we have the opportunity to mention accomplishments, and we do so, both President Marcos and the First Lady, which to this day, as a matter of fact, many of them are still being utilized. And hopefully there will be more of these structures that could be established in our country. For instance, like tertiary hospitals, perhaps also in the regions we could have this. But we're entering now another field as far as foreign relations are concerned. And well, historically, it was the young Ferdinand Marcos Jr. who, together with his mother, first opened the bamboo curtain. They were the first of our leaders in our country to be welcomed overwhelmingly by the People's Republic of China, the reception in Beijing, and the tour that they were given throughout the different establishments and programs and projects of China at the time, together with a visit to Chairman Mao. I don't think any other president after President Marcos has been able to shake the hand and meet and even have a few words with Chairman Mao. Well, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. was there. He met, he talked, he had his photograph taken with Chairman Mao, the leader of the Cultural Revolution that has brought about what China is today. So again, you will ask, bakit Marcos na naman ang papasok bilang presidente? At bakit? Meron ba kayong alam na pumunta ng China nung siya ay bata pa? At doon nga, nagkaroon ng pagkakataon makipagkita kay Chairman Mao and of course the rest of Chinese officialdom. That was Bongbong Marcos as a young boy. And when you close your eyes as he speaks, then you could also hear the decibels of his father. He has the same voice tone, although if allowed to speak the way he has been trained to speak, he has already limited his British accent. But there was one speech that he had some time back where really you could think that he was a British Marcos who was addressing his audience. But nonetheless, what I'm trying to say is, it is no longer the father that we are trying to epitomize at this stage. And before we even give our accolades to the son, we know what this quotation from that poem is all about, from that poet is all about, that the son is the father of the man. And so it goes that in many incidents in the past, we have actually gone through all of this different series, not different, but the series of all of this sufferance that he went through. And I've always asked, masakit yung kanyang dinaanan, ngunit hindi siya lumaban, hindi siya nagsalita. You will remember there was even this debate on stage where you had Cayetano face to face accusing him of all of the stolen wealth, etc. And yet Cayetano is now part of the unity team of Bongbong Marcos, to the consternation of many loyalists, perhaps, who sometimes do not forgive and forget, and do not forget and forgive. So whichever way it goes, there you could see the character of the man. May bait talaga. Because even with the opposition, you have, Abalos, for instance, he was also part of the opposition. And he is now appointed as Secretary of Local Government in the Ferdinand Marcos Jr. administration, and also his campaign manager way back from 2016. Again, as I've said, to the consternation of many loyalists. But then again, that indicates the character of BBM. Not for us to question, but for us to appreciate, to respect, and to even honor. Because as I've repeated, may bait talaga. How many of us would not even, the first time Mrs. Marcos invited Senator Enrile at her birthday party when she turned 70 years old, I hesitated to enter the hall where he was seated beside Mrs. Marcos. May bait din ang kanyang ina na minana nitong anak niyang si BBM. How easily it is sometimes to say, forgive and forget. But to be able to show this in action is a different thing altogether. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the rallies, the caravans, the people that attended all of this, millions at the venue where he would speak. One line that he repeats, pagkakaisa, unity, repeatedly, to dramatize what it means that this is the platform on which each of us must stand if we intend to develop as a nation together. Isang salita lang yun, one word, unity, which sometimes even in historical episodes has been very difficult to achieve. Even his own father had a difficult time with this. He tried it with the unification of different political parties under what was then called the KBL, ang kilusang Bagong Lipunan. Bagong Lipunan was an offshoot of the declaration of martial law, because that's exactly what President Marcos said. I am declaring martial law in order to build a new society. And in our language, the new society is Bagong Lipunan. And you could even hear the drum song of the Bagong Lipunan anthem during the rallies. It's a new society which his father intended to complete during his tenure for 20 years, for 2 decades. But it was also difficult. As I've said, he had the KBL, but then he also could see that there will always be an opposition because we are a democratic country. And he welcomed this. As a matter of fact, in the parliament that was organized during martial law's time, it was first considered as the interim Batasang Pambansa, meaning an interim leading to the regular parliament. He already had the opposition coming in to be elected likewise there in the parliament. And then you had the regular assembly where members of the opposition also won their seats to be members, and they call them delegates, or assemblymen to the parliament. He was already foreseeing how it would be as far as a change of government would be, to have only one legislative branch, which is parliament, instead of having Congress and the Senate sometimes at odds and having difficulty in the passage of law. And this was also leading on to a federal form of government, although this was not widely spoken about during President Ferdinand Marcos Sr.'s time. But then you have now the son, BBM, and he stood on that particular platform and party policy, the Federal Party of the Philippines, already continuing what could have started early on when the NEDA, during his father's time, partitioned our country into different regions, where the provinces in each region would be able to support itself, decide on the policies, programs, and projects by themselves without having to get clearance from the central government in Manila. That was the background, so to speak, or the foundations where the federal form of government would eventually be established. And now we see that that was the party that BBM chose to be a member of, together with what it stood for. And so we could see already the upcoming changes, not just changes, but a new constitution that will be, well, taken into consideration, not just by the administration, but hopefully a constitutional convention for the writing of a new constitution, because we are still under the albatross of the 1987 constitution of Mrs. Aquino, which was written by men and women that she personally chose, who were not elected by the people or chosen by the people. and whose provisions are so lengthy and kilometric that many ideas are actually swallowed in. Well, times are changing, and that is why you need a new fundamental law to keep abreast with what the changes are for now within our country. Outside of our country, as I've said, I started by saying that there is no other person running for the presidency in the past 36 years who has met the chairman of the People's Republic of China. But I'm not going to brag about that, except that recently, just a couple of days ago, you have all these other heads of state already acknowledging and congratulating BBM, and also their ambassadors meeting with him and already making all important proposals. But this is where our foreign relations is very important. And he has spoken of this in several interviews and then elaborated on this as he was giving us some snippets of his conversations with the ambassadors from different countries. For example, the investments that could be coming in, the technology that we could utilize, particularly in agriculture, with the environment now, as far as food security is concerned, affecting the whole world. And this is where BBM has emphasized that one country alone cannot rise over all of these consequences of a pandemic that has hit the world for the past 2 years, and in many countries still being affected by this pandemic. But because of the limitations in the production of food, and then of course, because of many instances where the concentration, not many, but most concentration was done for medical supplies, for medical equipment, for the vaccines that had to be produced, and of course, the need for health workers and frontliners and all of this. So with all of that in mind, BBM has already mentioned how important it is to balance all of this with our relations with other countries, because as the world reels with food insecurity and development as far as food production is concerned, then we here in the Philippines must also consider this as a priority. So you have already indications of where we're going in that brief press conference that he held. But then again, as I've said, foreign relations is crucial. We have still the hegemony of the United States of America, and then we have the rising of power of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation and China. Then you have the movements here in the South China Sea, which will have to be taken into consideration, cannot be left simply for the code of conduct that up to now, 10 years after this was still being discussed in the beginning among the member countries, the 10 member countries of the ASEAN, and still no respite as far as the conduct of the sea is concerned. That will also have to be taken into serious consideration, because you have now movements coming from other allies of the United States of America, like Australia, Britain, New Zealand, with all their, warships moving in the area, whatever reason they are doing, patrolling, etc. And then to balance this with our conduct of trade and economic relations with China, where 2 years ago, I understand that there was already the signing of an agreement regarding the development of natural gas in some of those islets in the South China Sea. So all of this, BBM spoke of this geopolitics, which is changing its complexion as we speak, almost on a day-to-day basis, plus, of course, what's happening in Europe and how the United States of America utilizes sanctions each time it wants to desire a country to behave. So we have to be not just aware of this, but wary of it, because it has happened to us in many occasions, not just during the time of the father of BBM, but even consequently afterwards, when they wanted to continue, I mean, America wanted to continue or to extend the bases, the military bases, and several other matters revolving around security. I don't know security for whom, but the security, they say, of the nations in this around the South China Sea or whatever. Now you have President Biden of America taking a tour here in our area in Asia and in Japan, announcing that America will come to the defense of Taiwan if it will be invaded by China. We don't know where this is coming from, but that is how America telegraphs its intents, not just not just within a region, but throughout the world. We've experienced this in many ways in other countries being invaded for I don't know what reason. Of course, Vietnam was one of the longest of these wars, and America had to depart from it. They wouldn't call it surrender, but after a decade or so, they just couldn't hack it, if I may be very colloquial about it. Then, of course, you have Afghanistan, you had Syria. Oh my goodness, until the time that the Russian Federation came in to support Bashar al-Assad. Then you had at least some of those cities already taken over and now a rehabilitation happening. And so you could see that BBM now assuming the role of a leader, not just of his own country, but the leader of the region in a way, because he is much aware of how at one time with the American bases here, we now have 5 over the Philippine bases occupied by American troops or uniformed men of the United States military. And so this is under an executive agreement known as the EDCA. How this will be dealt with? Well, we can foresee how that would happen. But then BBM has already began his stand insofar as where the Philippines is, without using the ordinary language in diplomacy or the usual, we are standing on an independent foreign policy, etc. We've heard this grandmother statement so many times. He has gone to the specifics where it could be helpful for us to be able to have good relationship with all of these countries that are coming in to help, not just to help, but to come with their inventions, their technology, whatever else that they can be able to share both ways, trade relations and so forth. This is the son of the father of the man. And if you go over that poem, because that is the last line, then perhaps you will understand exactly what I'm talking about. Because this is not a way of just giving praises to BBM, because he does not need any more praises than 32 million votes to his name. I think now you could be reading this or watching this on live television. Can you imagine every individual that has shaded the circle beside his name believes that he will be able to have this president give him a better quality of life? If, according to the theme of this administration, we are united and we are together. And so, without going into those details of the sufferance that BBM went through and remaining silent through it all and standing firm on the conviction that his father did our country right and his mother contributed with her love, with the true, the good, and the beautiful that is characteristic of her. He stands firm on this. Those are his roots. That is within his soul. That is within his heart. That is within his mind. Now he stands as the son of the father of the man, by himself. Not an image, not a replica, but Ferdinand Marcos Jr. You heard him speak just a couple of days ago. That in itself is already indicative of where our country will be going. In the eulogy that he delivered when his father was temporarily interred in the Valley of the Temples in Honolulu, he gave the history of his father's outstanding life as a young man, as a lawyer, as a politician, as a president. And he capped this by saying that he was also his friend. He was my father, he was my idol, whatever else you could add to it, and he was my friend. And he spoke of his father in such glowing words that the death of Ferdinand Marcos reverberated throughout the world. But at the end of his eulogy, I have not memorized those lines, but they have somehow been repeated in my memory a number of times. It may not be a direct quote, but I'd like to repeat it for those of you who have followed the Marcoses for the past 20 years of Ferdinand Edralin Marcos and the 36 years after him, and now for the future of our country with Ferdinand Marcos Jr. These were the words he said to us, to the Filipinos, to all of us. Walk tall and be proud, for you have stood at the foot of a man touched by God. That was how he addressed all of us. And now we stand by the side of this man who will be leading our country for the next 6 years. Thank you very much for having joined me. This is a full hour that I would have dedicated otherwise to 32 million Filipinos who have remained loyal to an ideal and will continue to remain loyal to the son who is now the father of the man. This has been your hour, and this is Rita Gadi.